The silence hit me like a physical blow when I walked through the front door that Tuesday evening. No sounds from the kitchen, no television murmuring in the background, no boots by the entrance, just an emptiness that seemed to echo through every room of our farmhouse. I called out Marcus's name, my voice bouncing off the wooden walls we'd painted together 3 summers ago. Nothing. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking time that suddenly felt meaningless. I set down my purse and walked through our home, checking each room methodically, though deep down I already knew what I'd find. The master bedroom told the story I didn't want to read. Marcus's side of the closet gaped open, hangers scattered on the floor like fallen soldiers. His favorite boots were gone, along with the leather jacket I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. The dresser drawers hung open, revealing empty spaces where his clothes once lived. In the kitchen, I found the note. 2 lines on a piece of torn notebook paper, his familiar handwriting now feeling like a stranger's. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I've gone with Elena. Don't try to find us." Elena, our farmhand, the 23-year-old woman we'd hired 6 months ago to help with the harvest season. The same woman who'd sat at our dinner table, who'd laughed at Marcus's jokes, who'd accepted my kindness with those bright, grateful eyes. I sank into a kitchen chair, the note trembling in my hands. 22 years of marriage, reduced to 2 sentences on torn paper. 3 days passed in a haze of disbelief and practical necessities. I had to call the bank, explain to neighbors, figure out how to manage the farm alone. The corn wasn't going to harvest itself, and the equipment payments wouldn't pause for my broken heart. I was in Marcus's study looking for the insurance papers when I found it. Hidden behind a false back in his desk drawer was a manila envelope I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I pulled it free, feeling the weight of important documents inside. The first paper made my blood run cold. A deed. But not to our farm, to a property in Costa Rica. Beachfront land worth more than our entire operation here in Nebraska. The deed was dated 6 months ago, right around the time we'd hired Elena. The second document was even worse. A bank statement from an account I didn't know existed, showing regular transfers of money, our money, to this Costa Rican account. Thousands of dollars siphoned away while I'd been working 16-hour days to keep our farm afloat. But the third document was what made me sink into Marcus's leather chair, my world tilting completely off its axis. Incorporation papers for a company called Paradise Holdings LLC, listed as co-owners, Marcus Thompson and Elena Rodriguez. They hadn't just run off together. This had been planned. For months, maybe longer, they'd been systematically stealing from me, from us, preparing their new life while I'd been living in complete ignorance. Every smile, every family dinner, every time Elena had looked me in the eye and called me Mrs. Sarah. It had all been an elaborate lie. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, diving deep into the digital trail Marcus and Elena had left behind. What I found made my stomach churn with a mixture of rage and determination. The Paradise Holdings LLC had been purchasing property all over Costa Rica, not just the beachfront land, but rental properties, a small resort, even a coffee plantation. They'd been building an empire with money stolen from our farm, using my sweat and sacrifice as their foundation. I found flight records. Marcus and Elena had left for San Jose 3 days ago, just hours after I discovered them missing. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd booked their return flights. Open-ended tickets, but still traceable. The more I dug, the more I realized how long this betrayal had been brewing. bank transfers going back 8 months, property searches dating back a full year. Marcus had been planning this before we'd even hired Elena. She hadn't seduced him away from me. They'd been partners from the beginning. But then I found something that changed everything. A police report from Elena's hometown in Mexico, filed 2 years ago. Elena Rodriguez didn't exist. The woman we'd known as our farmhand was actually Maria Santos, wanted for fraud and embezzlement in 3 different states. I stared at the mugshot on my screen, the same face that had smiled at me across our dinner table, the same eyes that had looked so grateful when I'd welcomed her into our home. Maria Santos, professional con artist. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a cheating husband and a stolen nest egg. This was about a criminal who had targeted us, studied us, and executed a perfect long-term scam. And now, I had something Marcos didn't know I had, information that could destroy them both. I waited until I knew they'd be awake in Costa Rica before making the call. My hands were steady now, my mind crystal clear. The number was easy to find. Paradise Holdings LLC had proudly listed their contact information on their business registration. Marcus answered on the second ring. Paradise Holdings, this is Marcus. The sound of his voice, so casual and professional, made something cold settle in my chest. Hello, Marcus. It's your wife. The silence stretched so long I thought he might hang up. Finally, Sarah, how did you get this number? I found your little business venture very impressive. Though I have to wonder how the Costa Rican authorities will feel about your partner's real identity. Another pause. What are you talking about? Maria Santos. Ring any bells? Wanted for fraud in Texas, California, and New Mexico. Did she mention that when you two were planning to steal my life savings? I heard him whisper something to someone in the background, Elena or Maria or whoever she really was. Then he came back to the phone, his voice tight with panic. Sarah, you don't understand. We can work this out. Oh, I understand perfectly. You've been planning this for over a year, building your little paradise while I worked myself to the bone, keeping our farm running. But here's what you don't understand, Marcus. I'm not the naive farm wife you thought I was. What do you want? The question I'd been waiting for. I want what's mine, every penny you stole plus interest. And I want it transferred back to our joint account within 24 hours. Or, I'm calling the FBI with everything I've found. That's impossible. The money's tied up in... Then untie it. Because if you don't, your precious Elena is going to find herself in a Costa Rican jail waiting for extradition. Marcus called back 6 hours later. This time, Elena was on the line too, her voice honey-sweet despite the desperation I could hear underneath. Mrs. Sarah, please, you don't understand our situation, she began, and I almost laughed at the audacity. Maria, I interrupted, using her real name deliberately. I understand your situation perfectly. You're a career criminal who thought you'd found the perfect mark in a lonely farmer and his trusting wife. That's not. Save it. Marcus, I'm assuming you've had time to think about my offer. Sarah, we can't liquidate everything in 24 hours. Some of these investments are long-term. But we can offer you something else. I waited, letting the silence stretch. We'll give you the farm, full ownership, clear title, and we'll transfer what liquid assets we have, about 150,000. The farm is already half mine, Marcus. Try again. Elena's voice cut in, sharper now. We could disappear, Mrs. Sarah. Change our names. Go somewhere you'll never find us. Take what we can carry and leave you with nothing. The threat hung in the air between us. But they'd made a crucial error. They'd shown me their desperation. "You could try," I said calmly. "But, Maria, I don't think you understand how extradition treaties work. And, Marcos, I don't think you realize that every financial transaction you've made is traceable. The FBI is very good at following money trails, especially when there's interstate fraud involved." Marcus came back on the line. "What exactly do you want, Sarah?" "I want justice, but I'm a practical woman. So here's my final offer. You transfer back every penny you can liquidate immediately. You sign over your shares in Paradise Holdings to me. And Maria disappears from your life forever. Do that, and I might be persuaded not to press charges. And if we refuse, then I make some phone calls, and you both spend the next decade in federal prison." While waiting for their response, I wasn't sitting idle. I'd contacted a private investigator in Costa Rica, a former DEA agent named Carlos Mendoza, who specialized in financial crimes. What he found in 48 hours was staggering. Paradise Holdings wasn't just stealing from me. They were running an elaborate shell game with at least 6 other victims, all middle-aged farmers or small business owners, all targeted by Elena Cia Maria using the same method: pose as a grateful immigrant worker, gain trust, seduce the husband, and systematically drain their accounts. Carlos sent me photographs of the other properties they'd purchased: a vineyard in California, a ranch in Texas, a marina in Florida. All bought with money stolen from hard-working families, all registered under different LLC names with Marcus and Maria as silent partners. The most shocking discovery was a storage unit in San Jose containing false documents for at least a dozen identities. Elena Rodriguez was just one of many personas Maria had created over the years. Birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses, enough fake documentation to disappear and reinvent herself anywhere in the world. But Carlos had also found their weakness. Maria was pregnant. The medical records were clear. 8 weeks along, which meant the baby had been conceived while they were still on my farm, still sitting at my dinner table, still pretending to be my employee and my faithful husband. This changed everything. Pregnant women couldn't disappear as easily. They needed stability, medical care, documentation for the child. Maria's condition made her vulnerable in ways she probably hadn't fully considered. I stared at the ultrasound photo Carlos had somehow obtained, my emotions a tangle of rage and something else I couldn't name. That baby was innocent in all this, but it was also my leverage, because now I knew something they didn't know I knew. And in a game this high stakes, information was everything. 3 days after my ultimatum, I received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed with eyes that held the same determined fire I'd been feeling since this nightmare began. "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Catherine Walsh. I believe your husband and his partner stole my ranch." I invited her in, and over coffee at my kitchen table, Catherine told me a story that made my blood boil. 2 years ago, Maria, going by the name Carmen Delgado then, had worked for Catherine's family in California. Same pattern. Grateful immigrant, gained trust, seduced Catherine's husband, and systematically drained their accounts before disappearing. "The worst part," Catherine said, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly, "is that my husband died 6 months after they left. Heart attack. The stress of losing everything. The shame of being fooled so completely. It killed him." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "How did you find me?" "I've been tracking her for 2 years, following every lead, every alias, every stolen dollar. When Marcus Thompson's name showed up in association with a Costa Rican LLC, I knew I'd found her trail again. Catherine opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've documented everything. Every family she's destroyed, every dollar she's stolen, every lie she's told. The FBI knows about her, but she's always stayed one step ahead. Until now, I said quietly. Until now. Because this time, she's made mistakes. She's pregnant, which limits her mobility. She's stayed in one place longer than usual. And most importantly, she's partnered with your husband, who isn't nearly as careful as she is. Catherine leaned forward. I have a proposition for you, Sarah. We work together. Pool our resources, our information, our determination. We make sure that Maria Santos finally faces justice for what she's done to our families. I looked at this woman who'd lost everything to the same criminal who destroyed my marriage, and I made a decision that would change the course of this entire situation. What did you have in mind? Catherine's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We wouldn't just recover our stolen money. We'd expose the entire operation and ensure that Maria could never victimize another family. The key, Catherine explained, spreading documents across my dining room table, is the pregnancy. She needs prenatal care, which means medical records. She needs stability, which means staying in Costa Rica longer than she'd like. And she needs Marcos to feel secure, which means she can't just disappear on him like she has with previous partners. We'd been in contact with 4 other families Maria had victimized over the past 5 years. Each had lost between $50,000 and $300,000. Each had been destroyed by the same methodical, heartless con. But this time, Maria had made a crucial error. She'd gotten emotionally involved with Marcus in a way she hadn't with previous Marks. The pregnancy proved it. She wasn't just stealing from him and planning to disappear. She was building a life with him. That emotional attachment is her weakness, Catherine said. She won't abandon him easily, which gives us time to close the trap. Our plan had 3 phases. First, we'd use the threat of criminal charges to force partial restitution from the liquid assets they had available. Second, we'd coordinate with law enforcement in multiple countries to freeze their remaining accounts before they could move the money again. Third, we'd ensure that Maria was arrested and extradited to face charges for all her crimes, not just the ones against me. The other families deserve justice too, Catherine said, and I couldn't argue with that. I called Marcus that evening with our new terms. You have 48 hours to transfer $400,000 to an account I'll specify. That's just the beginning of what you owe, but it's what I need to not press charges immediately. Sarah, we don't have that much liquid. Then liquidate something, sell a property, mortgage something. I don't care how you get it, but if that money isn't in my account by Friday at noon, I'm making a very interesting phone call to the FBI. And if we comply, then you buy yourself time to figure out how to return the rest. What I didn't tell him was that we'd already made the call to the FBI. They were very interested in Maria Santos and her multi-state crime spree. Friday morning brought the bank transfer, exactly $400,000 deposited into the account I'd specified. But it also brought something else, a call from Carlos Mendoza with news that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, you need to hear this. They're planning to run. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? My contact at the airport says they've booked flights to Belize for tomorrow morning. One-way tickets, paid in cash. They're liquidating everything they can carry and preparing to disappear. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The $400,000 wasn't compliance with my demands. It was a distraction, a way to buy time while they converted their remaining assets to cash and prepared for their final escape. I called Catherine immediately. "They're running tomorrow morning." "Then we move tonight. Is everything in place?" Everything was in place. The FBI had been coordinating with Costa Rican authorities for 3 days. An arrest warrant for Maria Santos had been issued, and Interpol had been notified. Marcos, as her partner in the fraud, would be detained as well. But there was something else Carlos had discovered that we hadn't shared with law enforcement yet, something that gave us one final card to play. "Sarah," Catherine said, "are you sure you want to do this? Once we make this call, there's no going back." I thought about Marcus sitting at our dinner table 6 months ago, laughing at his own jokes while his pregnant mistress served us stolen money in the form of an expensive wine. I thought about the other families destroyed by Maria's cons, including Catherine's husband, who died from the stress. "Make the call." Catherine dialed the number for the Costa Rican police while I called Agent Morrison at the FBI. By sunrise tomorrow, this would all be over. The last thing I did was call Marcus one more time. "Sarah?" He sounded nervous, which told me he knew something was wrong. "Just wanted to say goodbye, Marcus. Have a safe flight to Belize tomorrow." The sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. They knew we were onto them. But it was too late. The trap was already closing. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Costa Rica time. Agent Morrison's voice was calm but satisfied. "It's done, Mrs. Thompson. They were arrested at their hotel 3 hours ago." I sank into my kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd first read Marcus's goodbye note, the same chair where I'd discovered the stolen documents. But now, instead of betrayal and desperation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Both of them. Maria Santos is being held on multiple outstanding warrants. Your husband is being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. The Costa Rican authorities are being very cooperative. Carlos called 20 minutes later with more details. The arrest had been swift and complete. Marcus and Maria had been packing when the police arrived, suitcases full of cash and fake documents spread across their hotel bed. Maria had tried to run, but in her condition, she hadn't gotten far. "The baby?" I found myself asking, surprising myself with the concern in my voice. "She's fine, under medical supervision. The pregnancy isn't high risk, and she'll receive proper care while in custody." I shouldn't care about Maria's baby. It was the child of the woman who'd destroyed my marriage and the man who'd betrayed me. But that innocent life hadn't chosen its parents or their crimes. Catherine arrived that afternoon with a bottle of champagne and news about the asset recovery. "Preliminary estimates suggest we'll be able to recover about 70% of the total stolen funds," she said, popping the cork. "The properties are being seized, the accounts frozen. It'll take time to sort through everything, but justice is finally being served." We sat on my front porch, looking out over the farmland I'd nearly lost, and toasted to survival, to justice, to the strange friendship forged by shared betrayal and common purpose. "What will you do now?" Catherine asked. I considered the question. The farm was mine now, truly mine. The insurance money would help rebuild what Marcos had taken. But more than that, I discovered something about myself these past weeks, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I think I'll run this place properly. Maybe hire some legitimate help this time. We both laughed at that, but underneath the humor was a hard-earned wisdom. Trust would come slowly now, if at all. 6 weeks later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching my husband of 22 years stand before a judge in shackles. The man I'd once loved, once trusted with my heart and my future, looked smaller somehow, diminished by his choices and their consequences. Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and theft of marital assets. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 5. He'd also been ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though we all knew the money was likely gone forever. Maria's trial was more complex. Facing charges in 4 states, she'd ultimately accepted a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, in exchange for cooperation in recovering stolen assets and testifying against other Confederates in her criminal network. The baby had been born healthy, a daughter. Through her attorney, Maria had asked if I would consider adoption, since she had no family and Marcus would be in prison for years. The request had stunned me. After everything she'd done, she was asking me to raise the child conceived during her affair with my husband. I'd said no, of course. The child would go to a loving family through the state adoption system, but the request haunted me in ways I couldn't explain. Catherine and I had become close friends through this ordeal. She'd moved to Nebraska, buying a small farm 30 miles from mine. We met for coffee every Tuesday, 2 women rebuilding their lives from the ashes of betrayal. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" she asked one afternoon. I considered the question. They'd have destroyed more families, stolen more dreams. Eventually, Maria would have gotten bored with Marcus and moved on to her next victim. And we'd have spent the rest of our lives as their forgotten casualties. Instead, we'd become something neither of us had expected: advocates for other victims of financial fraud. We'd started a support group, testified before Congress about the need for stronger international cooperation in financial crimes, and helped law enforcement understand the psychological tactics used by long-term con artists. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life with purpose. A year and a half after that terrible Tuesday when I'd come home to an empty house, I stood in the same kitchen with a real estate agent, reviewing the final paperwork for the sale of my farm. I'd made the decision 6 months earlier, after Catherine had been killed in a car accident. Without her friendship and shared purpose, the farm felt too empty, too full of painful memories. I needed a fresh start, somewhere Marcus had never been, somewhere Maria had never walked. The buyer was a young couple with 2 small children, their eyes bright with the same dreams Marcus and I had once shared. They saw the farmhouse as I'd once seen it, not as a place of betrayal, but as a home full of possibilities. "Mrs. Thompson," the husband said as we signed the final documents, "would you mind if we asked you to stay for dinner? Our daughter Emma has been so excited to meet the lady who grew the best corn in 3 counties. I smiled, remembering when I'd believed those simpler times would last forever. "That's very kind, but I have a plane to catch." My new life waited in Oregon. A small consulting business helping law enforcement understand financial fraud, a cottage by the ocean, and the peace that comes with knowing you've survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger. The drive to the airport took me past the field where I'd first seen Elena, Maria, working in the summer heat. For just a moment, I allowed myself to remember the woman I'd been then, trusting, content, blissfully unaware of the storm approaching. I wouldn't trade the wisdom I'd gained for the innocence I'd lost, but sometimes I missed that woman who could sleep peacefully beside her husband without wondering what secrets he was keeping. At the airport, boarding pass in hand, I looked back one last time at Nebraska, at the life I'd built and lost and rebuilt again, at the place where I'd learned that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of hurting us most deeply. But I'd also learned something else, that we're stronger than we know, braver than we believe, and capable of surviving betrayals that once would have destroyed us. The plane lifted off into a perfect autumn sky, carrying me toward whatever came next. 3 years later, I received a letter that changed everything. It came from Marcus, postmarked from federal prison in Oklahoma. His handwriting shakier than I remembered, but still recognizably his. "Sarah," it began, "I know I have no right to contact you after what I did. I know sorry isn't enough for 22 years of marriage thrown away for a fantasy that was built on lies from the beginning. But I need you to know that I understand now what I lost, what we lost, what I destroyed with my selfishness and stupidity." He wrote about his time in prison, about the therapy sessions where he'd finally confronted the midlife crisis and ego that had made him vulnerable to Maria's manipulation. He wrote about learning that everything he'd thought he'd known about her was fabricated, her background, her feelings for him, even her pregnancy, which had been carefully timed to ensure maximum emotional leverage. "She played me as expertly as she played you," he wrote. "The difference is that you were innocent. I chose to betray you. I chose to steal from you. I chose to throw away the best thing in my life for a lie wrapped in pretty packaging." The letter went on for 6 pages, detailing his remorse, his therapy, his gradual understanding of the depth of his betrayal. But it was the last paragraph that brought tears to my eyes. "I heard about your work with fraud victims, about how you've helped dozens of families recover from financial crimes. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Proud of the strength you found when I left you with nothing. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into a way to help others. That's the woman I fell in love with 30 years ago, and I'm sorry it took losing you to remember who you really are." I set the letter aside and walked to my cottage window, looking out at the Oregon coastline where I'd found peace. The consulting business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. I'd testified in dozens of cases, helped recover millions in stolen assets, and provided closure for families who'd been victimized by con artists like Maria. The work was fulfilling in ways I'd never expected. Every family reunited with their stolen savings, every criminal brought to justice, every victim who found the strength to rebuild. It all felt like a small victory against the darkness that had once consumed my own life. I never wrote back to Marcus. Forgiveness was a process, and I wasn't sure I'd ever complete that journey. But reading his words, understanding that he finally grasped the magnitude of what he'd lost and what I'd overcome, provided a closure I hadn't known I needed. That evening, I called my newest client, a widow in Montana whose farmhand had disappeared with her late husband's pension fund. Tomorrow, I'd fly to Helena and begin the familiar process of tracking down stolen dreams and rebuilding shattered trust. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life of purpose, a life where betrayal had been transformed into advocacy, where loss had become a foundation for helping others find their way back to hope. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and redemption, I realized that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the best thing we ever do. Marcus had taken my marriage, my trust, and my savings, but he'd also inadvertently given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, brave enough to fight for justice, and compassionate enough to help others find their way through their own darkness. That was a gift I'd never trade for all the farms in Nebraska. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimately redemption. It means the world to me that you've joined Sarah on her journey from devastating betrayal to finding purpose in helping others. I'd love to hear from you. Please write in the comments below what part of the world you're listening from. Are you tuning in from a small farm town like Sarah's, or perhaps from a bustling city? Maybe you're listening while commuting, working, or relaxing at home. Wherever you are, you're part of this community, and I'd love to know more about you. If you enjoyed Sarah's story of strength in the face of betrayal, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Your support helps me continue creating these tales of resilience, justice, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than you know, and sometimes our greatest trials become our greatest triumphs.